What happens when you pour Buck Bourbon 110 proof into a scrape and sit 40 yards downwind? A hunter in North Carolina put it out with corn on a property where he hadn't seen anything on camera in months. 3 days later, he had 3 bucks and 10 does on film. A guy in Ohio who was skeptical of every attractant he'd ever tried poured it around noon near a creek, and by that same night, he had a 5-point, an 8-point, and a 10-point on camera. The next night, an 11-point showed up. He hunted the field the following afternoon, and that 11-point came in on a straight line to the spot like he was on a mission. Shot him at 25 yards, scored 155 and 3/8. That's not my data. I'm not affiliated with Buck Bourbon, and nobody paid me to say any of this. That's from the Buck Bourbon product page, where hunters post their own trail cam pulls and kill photos. And the results are consistent enough across enough different states that I had to test it myself. I ran it last summer across 2 camera sites on my property in hardwood timber. One site with plain corn and one with Buck Bourbon mixed into the corn. The plain corn site produced the usual doe traffic, a few small bucks, nothing unexpected. The Buck Bourbon site had 6 different bucks on camera the first night, not the first week, the first night. And on a sit in late October, I poured a fresh application into an active scrape at 5:45 a.m. At 6:08, roughly 20 minutes later, a doe walked in nose first and spent 2 minutes working the scrape. By 6:30, a basket-racked 6-point followed the same path. Whether 20 minutes is typical, I can't promise. But on a property with existing deer traffic near an active scrape line, the response time from a fresh pour can be that fast, because the fermented grain volatiles start dispersing on the morning thermal the moment they hit the air. I went to Tractor Supply the next day and bought 3 more bags. My wife saw the receipt and asked why I was buying bourbon at a farm store. I told her it was for the deer. She's heard that one before. And stick around to the end of this video, because there's a placement trick that separates the guys who pour this on the ground and wait from the guys who use it to engineer exactly where a buck stops and how long he stays there. That trick turned a good camera site into the stand I killed my November buck from. Before I get into the science and the method, check your state regulations. Buck Bourbon 110. Proof is a food-based attractant. It contains processed grain byproducts, corn, salt, trace minerals, and natural anise flavoring. In every state that defines bait as any food or consumable substance placed to attract deer, this product is illegal to hunt over during season. That includes Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Colorado, Montana, Nebraska, South Dakota, Vermont, and Virginia. Wisconsin bans it in CWD counties. Other states have public land restrictions even where private land baiting is legal. If your state bans baiting, use this for off-season camera surveys and supplemental feeding only. Do not hunt over it. A $13 bag of attractant is not worth a confiscated rifle and revoked hunting privileges. Now, why does this product pull deer from further away and faster than plain corn or a mineral block? The answer is in the ingredient list and how the product is manufactured. Buck Bourbon 110. Proof is made in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, which sits in the middle of bourbon country. The base ingredient is dried distiller's grains, which are the grain byproducts left over after bourbon distillation. When corn is fermented and distilled to make bourbon, the leftover mash retains a concentrated sweet, fermented aroma that is dramatically more pungent than raw corn. Think of the difference between a raw apple sitting on a table and a jar of apple cider vinegar sitting on the same table. The vinegar fills the room. The raw apple, you have to get within arm's length, about 2 feet, to smell it. Fermentation changes everything about how far a scent travels. Fermentation concentrates and amplifies volatile organic compounds, the molecules that evaporate at ambient temperature and travel on air currents. This is the same reason fermented sour corn has been the #1 DIY hog bait in the South for decades, and the same reason apple cider vinegar draws deer from further than fresh apples. Fermentation is nature's scent amplifier. Those fermented grain volatiles are what give Buck Bourbon its range advantage over plain corn. A pile of shelled corn has a scent plume that extends maybe 20 to 30 yards in calm conditions. Buck Bourbon's fermented grain base, combined with the natural anise flavoring they add, throws a scent plume that reaches significantly further. The anise is doing heavy lifting here. Anise oil contains anethole, which is one of the most potent volatile attractants available to deer hunters. It's 13 times sweeter than sugar to mammalian scent receptors, and it disperses on thermal currents, the rising warm air columns that carry scent across distance at dawn and dusk, further than almost any other natural compound. The combination of fermented grain volatiles plus anise creates a two-layer scent profile. The anise reaches the deer from distance, 100 yards or more on a good thermal. The fermented grain sweetness confirms there's food at the source when the deer arrives. That's why multiple hunters report deer coming in on a straight line. They're not wandering and stumbling across it. They're following a scent trail that's pulling them from a distance you'd normally associate with a food plot, not a pile of feed. The other thing buck bourbon has that plain corn doesn't is 14% protein and a trace mineral package including zinc, iron, calcium, manganese, copper, and cobalt. That mineral content is what makes the deer come back. Plain corn is a caloric bribe. The deer eats it, gets a sugar hit, and may or may not return, depending on what else is available. A product with minerals gives the deer something its body is actively seeking, which means the return visit isn't driven by memory of a treat. It's driven by a physiological craving. That's why the buck bourbon site on my property was still getting daily visits 3 weeks after I stopped refreshing it. The deer were consuming the mineralized soil itself, the same behavior you see at natural mineral licks and established dical sites. It's same principle as the dicalcium phosphate mineral licks I've covered in other videos, except buck bourbon wraps the mineral delivery inside a feed the deer is already motivated to consume. You're not hoping the deer finds your mineral site by accident. You're pulling him in with scent and flavor, and the minerals are the hook that brings him back tomorrow. That layered attraction system, long-range scent plus caloric reward plus mineral craving, is the same principle behind every trick in the buck hunter's Bible. 77 tricks, each with the biology behind it. 90 pages covering attractant chemistry, scent control, stand placement, rut phase tactics, and a chapter of old-timer methods. There's a reference card in the back you can print and take to the stand. Links in the description below. Or scan the QR code on screen if you're watching on a TV. The application method matters more than most guys think. The Buck Bourbon website says to start feeding 2 to 4 weeks before your first hunt and continue throughout the season. That's the supplemental feeding approach, and it works if you're trying to hold deer on your property long term. But if you're trying to create an encounter for a specific site, the timing and placement need to be more precise. My method is to mix 1/3 of an 8-pound bag, roughly 2.5 pounds, about the weight of a large bag of sugar, into a 5-gallon bucket of shelled corn. Stir it up so every kernel gets coated, then pour that mix directly into an active scrape, the patch of bare dirt about 2 feet across, the size of a trash can lid, where a buck has been pawing the ground and leaving scent. If there's no active scrape in range of your stand, make one. Clear the leaves down to bare dirt with your boot. Hang a licking branch 4 to 5 feet off the ground, directly above it, and pour the mix into the center. I position that scrape 35 to 40 yards from my stand, roughly the distance from home plate to second base, on the downwind side so any approaching buck has to pass through my shooting lane to reach the bait. I don't put the product directly under my tree. A lot of guys make that mistake and end up with a deer staring straight up at them from 5 yards while they try to draw a bow at an impossible angle. The 35 to 40 yard offset gives you a broadside or quartering away shot, which means the deer is turned partially away from you, exposing the vitals at a comfortable distance while the deer's head is down in the scrape. That downward head position is your draw window. A deer with its nose in buck bourbon isn't scanning the canopy for hunters. It's locked on the food. One hunter on the buck bourbon site described exactly this. The deer was on a mission, walking straight to the product, head low, focused. That's 3 to 5 seconds of draw time at 25 to 35 yards. That's a dead deer. And the beauty of this setup is that the deer chose to be there. You didn't call him. You didn't rattle him in. He smelled something from 100 yards out, decided it was worth investigating, and walked himself into your shooting lane. The timing question is real. The product page says within hours. Multiple hunters confirmed same-night results on camera. My experience was consistent with that on the first site, but the second site took about 3 days before I started getting buck photos. The difference was terrain. The first site was in a creek bottom with hardwood timber, and a natural travel corridor, which is a strip of cover deer used to move between bedding and feeding areas. The second was on a ridgetop with sparse cover and no defined trail within 100 yards. The scent had to travel further, and the deer had to commit to an unfamiliar approach. If you're placing buck bourbon near an existing trail or scrape line, expect fast results. One reviewer on the buck bourbon site said he had deer on camera within an hour of his first pour. If you're trying to pull deer to a new location, give it 3 to 5 days before you evaluate. And here's where I need to be direct about a limitation. I ran buck bourbon against my homemade dye-cal and salt mineral mix on a third camera site. Same property, same time period. The mineral mix cost me about $1.50 per site. The buck bourbon cost roughly $4 per application at the rate I was using it. For camera survey purposes in the off-season, the mineral mix produced comparable visit frequency after the first 2 weeks. The buck bourbon produced faster initial response, more visits in the first 72 hours, and higher dwell time per visit because the deer were consuming feed rather than licking dirt. For hunting season attraction in a state where baiting is legal, buck bourbon wins on speed and dwell time. For off-season camera inventory on a budget, the mineral mix is 60% cheaper and produces the same long-term data. And I'm not going to pretend one product does everything better in every situation, because it doesn't. And I'd rather tell you that now than have you waste money on the wrong application. Use the right tool for the right job. The cost breakdown across a season is worth looking at. An 8-pound bag runs about $13 at Tractor Supply. A 25-pound bag runs about $30. If you're maintaining 2 sites and refreshing weekly through a 12-week season, you're looking at roughly $150 to $200 in product, depending on how heavy you pour. That's more than corn alone, which would run maybe $50 for the same period, but dramatically less than high-end liquid attractants that charge $18 to $25 for a 4-ounce bottle. And the deer response to buck bourbon, in my testing and in the reviews I've read across buck bourbon's own site, the Gone Forum, and Walmart reviews, is significantly stronger than the plain corn on pressured properties where deer have been eating corn for years and stopped associating it with anything special. On my property, the corn pile had been in the same spot for 2 seasons. The deer treated it like a drive-through. Walk in, grab some kernels, walk out. No lingering, no investigation, no commitment. The buck bourbon site, 200 yards away on the same property, had deer pawing the ground and licking dirt for 2 to 3 minutes per visit. Same deer, same property, different product. The fermented grain plus anise combination gives them something new. Novelty matters to deer. They're curious animals with 297 million olfactory receptors, about 60 times more than a human, and a new scent profile in familiar territory. Triggers investigation behavior, head up, nose forward. Walking directly toward the source. That plain corn on the same stump for the 3rd year in a row simply doesn't. And I'd rather tell you that now than have you waste money on the wrong application. A Walmart reviewer said the deer eat the dirt trying to get more, which tells you the flavor and mineral content are binding to the soil the same way my dye-cal mix does. The deer consume the product, then consume the dirt underneath it, because the minerals have leached into the top layer of soil. The zinc and calcium bind to clay particles, and the deer excavate to get to them. I had a hole 8 inches deep at my buck bourbon site after 6 weeks. The product was gone after the first week, but the deer kept digging because the soil itself had become the attractant. That's consumption behavior, not curiosity. And consumption behavior is what produces the repeat visits and the 30-minute dwell times that give you a realistic shot opportunity. You've had that sit where you dump corn on the ground and the deer blow through it in 90 seconds and keep walking. That's a calorie stop, not an attraction point. Buck bourbon is trying to create a destination, and based on what I've seen on my cameras and what dozens of hunters have posted independently, it does that better than anything else at its price point. Everything in this video, plus about 60 more field-tested techniques, are in the Buck Hunter's Bible: attractant chemistry, mineral biology, scent control, stand placement, rut phase tactics. Reference card in the back. It's in the description below. QR code on screen. Now, the placement trick I promised. This is what took my buck bourbon setup from a decent camera site to the stand where I killed my November buck. Instead of pouring the entire mix in one pile, I split it into 3 small deposits in a line, each about 10 yards apart, roughly the length of 2 pickup trucks, perpendicular to my stand. 3 small piles instead of one big one. The reason is that a single pile creates a single stopping point. The deer arrives, eats, and leaves. 3 deposits in a line create a feeding path. The deer hits the first pile, eats for 30 seconds, then moves to the second, then the third. That feeding path keeps the deer in your shooting lane for 2 to 3 minutes instead of 30 seconds. Think about that. 2 to 3 minutes of a deer standing broadside at 35 yards with its head down. And because the deer is moving between deposits, and there are natural pause points between each pile where the deer lifts its head, takes 2 steps, and drops its head again. Each of those head-down transitions is a draw opportunity. Instead of waiting for one perfect moment, you get 3. A buddy who guides in central Kentucky uses this exact method with buck bourbon for his archery clients and says it's responsible for more first-sit kills than any other setup he runs. He calls it the breadcrumb line. I laughed when he first described it. Then I watched the camera footage from his client's hunt and stopped laughing. 3 deposits 10 yards apart, perpendicular to the stand. The deer walks the line, you pick the best angle, and you draw when his head drops into the second or third pile. I didn't invent this. He showed it to me 2 seasons ago, and I've used it every sit since. One more thing worth mentioning. Several reviews noted that buck bourbon attracts bears, raccoons, turkeys, hogs, and what one guy described as 25 nice cows that tore a fence down to get to the bourbon block. If you hunt near livestock or in bear country, keep that in mind. The product is not species selective. The anise in it is a known bear attractant, which I covered in the anise oil video. Anything with a nose and a sweet tooth will find it. In hog country, you might end up feeding the pigs instead of attracting the deer. And in bear states, an unattended food source can create a bear encounter you didn't plan for. Plan your site placement accordingly and check it frequently. In my area, we don't have bears, so the raccoon traffic was my biggest nuisance. They showed up every night for the first week, ate what they could, and moved on. The deer still dominated the site by volume. But if you're in bear country, I'd place the site well away from your stand and entry route so a bear visit doesn't contaminate the approach you need to stay clean for deer. A $13 bag of buck bourbon is not worth a property liability issue with your neighbor's cattle. Try the breadcrumb line method on your next site. 3 deposits 10 yards apart, perpendicular to your stand, 35 to 40 yards downwind. Pour it the evening before you hunt. By morning, the scent plume from the anise and fermented grain will have been working all night on the thermal currents. Sit tight, stay quiet, and let the scent do the work. The deer that shows up won't be wandering. He'll be following a trail straight to your setup. And when his head drops into that second pile, that's your shot. The deer told you where he'd be. The buck bourbon told him where to go. And the breadcrumb line told you exactly when to draw. 3 deposits, 10 yards apart, perpendicular to the stand. Try it this season and count the photos. When the guy in the next stand asks how you got a buck on a Tuesday morning in November, you can decide whether to tell him about the bourbon or just smile and let him wonder.